So today, the continuing series on enlightened living. Today I get to talk about talking. But it's sort of on the menu because over the last few weeks we have been talking about how to stand on one's own 2 feet in terms of basically earning a living and making oneself useful in the world. And over the last few weeks, the sort of things we looked at is being learned, being skillful in applying our knowledge. And then the last time we looked at having the ethical side of that to apply our knowledge in a way that brings no harm to others or ourselves. But there is one final component of this making ourselves useful, which is basically networking and communicating with other people, because we can't do everything on our own. So even if you haven't heard the previous ones, today's talk is still quite a useful one, even as a standalone, because the energy or the positive or negative nature of the things we say can have a big effect on our states of mind and on our progress in meditation by the same token. Some people might think that what you say doesn't really matter that much. It's not like going and physically harming a person, but sometimes it can be quite destructive also as well. And also within the context of Buddhism, what people say, how they say it, the truth with which they say it has always been valued very highly, because it is a religion where no one ever gets forced to do anything. So it's only by being persuasive that it can be made interesting or encouraging for other people to practice from future generations. So you could say that the only reason that we still have these teachings after 2,500 years of history is that people have been pretty good at explaining about it down the years. Yes. So it's not just a question of having something to say, but having something worth hearing, and something which might also inspire people as well. Some people wonder the sort of things to avoid, and within the tradition this is sometimes known as unwholesome speech. We know mostly about avoiding telling lies or untruths, but other things to avoid would also include divisive speech, which means turning one person against another by the things we say. So creating disharmony, saying more than we need to, so idle chatter. When we've finished saying all the useful things, we keep on talking. And harsh speech, which would be things like swearing or shouting at people. Yes. If you can choose nice things to say to people, a person lacking encouragement in their life can be restored to inspiration for their life. But an ill-thought-out comment can sometimes destroy a person's morale in the same token. And the problem with words is that once they're out, you can't take them back and forget about them. And this is especially clear if you write it in a message or a text or post it in a public place on the internet. It's up there for eternity sometimes. So these are some of the 4 ways to avoid. It's a good start before we start talking about some of the things that you should be encouraged to say. These are some of the things which we should avoid. And it's very easy to let things slip out of your mouth without thinking very carefully about them, and much easier than to do something violent or aggressive in other modes of interacting with the world. And I won't spend too much time on it, but although some people might say, oh, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But unfortunately, in the Buddhist scriptures, there are some fairly scary karmic outcomes of speaking badly, especially to those who are of very high virtue. So someone who's enlightened, for example, if you happen to come up with a rather destructive comment towards them, it can have quite big karmic consequences. So I'm not going to go into that too much today, but just to say that it is important for Buddhists. But on the subject of saying too much, most people have got something to say, but once they've said it all, they keep on talking. And for this reason, the people of old once observed that most things that we find useful in our life, we got two of. We got 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, because we need backup. But our mouth, we only got 1 of, which is strange because we use it for 2 things, both eating and talking. And it's not to say you shouldn't talk while you're eating or something like that, but maybe there's a message in there that maybe we should talk only the minimum we need to. Otherwise, we would have more mouths than 1. Yes. There's a nice story I like to tell, which is a historical story about someone involved in one of the Russian revolutions called Ryleyev. And this is at the end of the period of the Tsars in Russia, going back to 1825. And once Tsar Nicholas had come on the throne, then there was a big rebellion called the Decembrist Uprising. And one of the leaders of the uprising, Mr. Ryleyev, was caught and he was sentenced to death on the gallows. So he had the noose around his neck and the trapdoor opened. But as soon as the trapdoor opened, the rope snapped and Mr. Ryleyev fell on the ground. And mostly, if that happened to someone when they are being hanged, it would be taken as a sign of providence or heavenly will, and the man would be saved from execution, would be pardoned somehow. So Mr. Ryleyev, he got to his feet, a little bit bruised and dirtied, but believing he had been saved, he called out to the crowd, "You see, in Russia they don't know how to do anything properly. They can't even make a proper rope." Meanwhile, the messenger was sent immediately to the Winter Palace about the failed hanging. And rather vexed by this disappointing turnaround, the Tsar nevertheless began to sign the pardon. But then he asked his messenger, did the prisoner say anything after this occurrence? And the messenger informed him that Russia doesn't even know how to make a proper rope. So the Tsar said, in that case, let us prove the contrary. And he tore up the pardon, and the next day Mr. Ryleyev was hanged again, and this time the rope didn't break. So the moral of this story is, sometimes you need to be particularly careful with sarcasm. The momentary satisfaction which you gain from a few biting words may be outweighed much later by the fallout that comes back to haunt you. In this, you might say, well, what do? Do I just keep my mouth shut? Are there some things which I should be saying? And before you go as far as to say something, maybe I should point out what speech is made up of. And there are several components which you can talk about for speech. Firstly, you can talk about the intention behind the words, which is important because sometimes the intentions could be based on greed or hatred or delusion, which would make anything that comes out in terms of words have some unwholesome ulterior motive. Next comes the words you choose to express them. They could be true or untrue, they could be polite or rude, and they could be useful or superfluous. So, lastly, you can say what you like, but there's also a fifth component, which is when you choose to say the words. Sometimes they might be true, everything perfect, but if you say them at the wrong time, they can add up to a disaster also. And this is the basis of something known as 5-star speech, which actually comes from a Buddhist teaching called the Vajra Sutta, where the Buddha recommended that anything that is blameless and praiseworthy speech ought to be spoken at the right time, spoken in truth, spoken affectionately, spoken beneficially, and spoken with a mind of goodwill. And if you want to put that in a slightly more easy way to understand, you could say that some of the things we often say don't come up to that standard of 5 stars. For example, if we say something out of anger, then we tend to miss out on the compassionate intention part. Therefore, anything comes out tends to come out wrong, like it's the anger speaking and not us speaking. White lies to small children, we might sort of cosset them by saying things like, oh, you're the most precious little boy in the world, try just to get them to stop crying. But really this is not really very effective in the long run. Otherwise they're going to get used to that sort of cosseting. Market banter, the sort of thing you hear in the marketplace, may be true, etc., but not very polite, rather more direct than we would be aiming for. Small talk at parties, maybe just keep the conversation going, fill in the embarrassing silences, but it may not be particularly useful. Sort of people droning on and boring things just to keep the conversation going. And not speaking at the right time might be something to do with a public disgracing. If you have occasion to point out someone's faults, then maybe it would be better to call them to one side before you do that. So, for some things, 5 stars are sort of optional. But what I'm trying to say is that for speech, if you really have some high-stakes conversation which you are trying to have with a person, then you better make sure it checks out on all 5 before you say it. Otherwise, you may have a problem on your hands. To come back to the example of what we ought to be saying to our children if we are going to make it 5-star speech, some guidance which I found quite useful was how to avoid telling white lies to children, and how can we speak to them in a way that will be more sustainable in the long run as a motivation boost for children. And there have been several studies which found that feedback from teachers to students that often conveys messages that affect the students' opinions of themselves and how capable or incapable they are of academic achievement can make a big difference to their future. Certain types of praise can do more harm than good to a child's independence, learning drive, self-confidence, and resilience. And it was research from Stanford University that found that you can classify what you say in terms of the sort of mindset it encourages in the person who hears it. And two sorts of mindset. The fixed mindset is a belief that one's abilities are carved in stone and not going to change, or they're predetermined at birth, which is not what we want to encourage. Or their second possibility is the growth mindset, which is the belief that one's skills and qualities can be cultivated if we put in the effort and we persevere. So obviously the second one is what we would like to encourage in the children by the comments we make, if it's truly going to be this 5-star speech. So people with a fixed mindset tend to ignore feedback, give up easily, measure success by comparing themselves to others. By contrast, those with growth mindsets are more likely to embrace challenges and compare themselves now with how they used to be. So compare themselves to themselves. If you praise the process, for example, by saying, I love how you are very thoughtful about the colors you chose and not the outcome, so process, not outcome. The outcome might be, oh, the colors in your drawing are beautiful, you have a good eye. So the first one was how you're very thoughtful about the colors you chose. So that can be modified further in the future. Process, not outcome. It helps children to develop a growth mindset. Similarly, when parents praise the outcome, it holds the kids back from developing resilience, confidence, or a desire to learn new things. So if your goal is to support your child's learning strategies, that can lead to success. Let's say it's sports you're talking about. You have two kids on a track team. The first kid is a passionate runner, while the second one is less athletic. So the kid who loves running doesn't put much effort in, doesn't practice much, and they still win first place at almost every track meet. The second kid, they pushes themselves but gets discouraged by the fact they haven't had a win. So to praise the process and not the outcome, instead of saying congratulations, you won, to the natural runner, they should acknowledge their skill without celebrating too much what they won or praising that too much. So they should praise their skills, and skills can develop yet further. And this will help them to feel supported without suggesting they've got an innate ability as the primary factor in their success. As for the less athletic child, praise the process again. You should praise them for their hard work and perseverance. And this helps them to maintain that self-esteem and stay motivated to succeed. And it will lead them towards the growth mindset. Even the kid who's doing well, they've still got a growth mindset because they realize above what they've got, there's higher still. Far so good. Skillful talk. Little story to finish up with. And it's a story not about Nagas this time, about cows. Okay. Yeah, a little bit easier for you to get your head around. And you know now about the Jātaka stories, which are previous birth stories from the Buddha. And I already told you that there are more than 500 of these previous births that are written down anyway. And generally the ones with the lower numbers are fairly low down the ladder in terms of rebirths, whereas the ones towards the end are getting quite close to enlightenment already, so slightly more esoteric ones. And here we have number 28, so pretty much entry-level ones, okay? And this one is about an ox called Nandivisāla. And in those days, animals could understand what people said to them. Maybe they still can. You reckon? Anyway, this ox called Nandivisāla was particularly strong. And in order to test it out, one time the owner of the ox roped together 100 carts like a train, and put the one ox on the front like a locomotive and attempted to get him to pull all these wagons along. And he could do it. He's such a strong ox. I think this one may even have been one of the Aesop's fables. Yeah. So, had miraculous strength from an early age. And when he found out that his ox could pull so many carts all at once, then the owner thought up a good scheme in order to make some money on this. So he went along to an unbelieving millionaire, I think there in the turban, cheering on from the sides, and he made the bet that his ox could pull 100 carts, whereas the millionaire bet him that he couldn't. So he lined up again all the wagons, roped them together, and then he said to the ox, "Go ahead and pull the carts, ox." And the ox didn't like the way he was spoken to, so he stubbornly refused to budge, because even oxen have feelings. So he lost his bet. Later on, however, to cut a long story short, the owner made a second bet and spoke politely to the ox and was able to win back his money. Yes. So, even speaking to animals, you need to have 5-star speech sometimes as well. So just to finish off with for today, I would like to conclude by saying that if you enjoyed meditation today, I would encourage you to meditate further at home if you can. Maybe picking about 20 minutes to meditate during a time of the day when you know you will be relatively free from interruption, and a time of the day when you're not feeling too tired generally. If you start with 20 minutes, then later on, once it becomes established in your life, you can build upon that as the inclination takes you. Some people like to meditate first thing in the morning because it gives a good start to the day. Other people who have problems sleeping might like to meditate before going to sleep at night. But whatever works well for you. Some people meditate in their car in the lunch break if they have a stressful job. If you have difficulty remembering the meditation instruction, you may find the Mind Gem app, MINDGEM. You can download that for free, and you got meditation instruction or audio tracks which you can follow along with while you set a length of time for you to meditate with. Here at the center, we have meditation classes every Tuesday and Thursday evening, and usually the meditation on a Thursday evening is a little bit longer, up to 45 minutes. And apart from that, on Saturday evenings between 7 and 8, there's also a Zoom talk and a meditation online every week, which you can follow on with in the comfort of your home. Once a month on a full moon day, we have a full moon meditation, which is due to come up on the 16th of April. The next one, which we have themed the Day of Gratitude, that will be held online for sure. And as for having a in-person one here too, we'll let you know if that's also possible. And a longer-term retreat for young men. In June, we hope to hold a month-long retreat where you can try out being a monk for a month, or at the very least 2 weeks, and it will probably be held in Belgium along with all the other branches of our organization in Europe. The next weekend meditation retreats coming up in July, 8th to 10th of July. Probably here, but more details will become available closer to the time. Yes. So for today, I think I will finish there.